Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X researcher and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled, When Did They Find Out That the Sun Was Dying? Now, LASCO, which stands for Large Angle Spectrometer Chronographed C1 images, can still be obtained from certain places. And figure 1 shows a screenshot from a website in Germany dedicated to LASCO C1 images. And the LASCO instruments were supposedly on the SOHO spacecraft, and SOHO stands for Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. The C1 chronograph was designed by the Max Planck Institute for Solar System Research in Göttingen, Germany. And the website states that a certain set of images which have been combined into a video format are from 1996. Here you are, here's the date, 1996. And here's the video format in MPEG. And I downloaded that. They are 657 frames. But I have seen these images before. I'm not sure which website I got them from. But I had some images already, so I went to see. And indeed, well, the LASCO C1 chronograph was designed in Germany, so it's not surprising that it's on a German website, these old images. And these images are actually composite images where the occulter is replaced by data for the sun's magnetic field. But if you look at these images, the timestamp is not from 1996. This is clearly not a 9. This is an 8 there. So these are from 1986. And you can look at the timestamp here more closely. You can clearly see this is not a 9. That's a 9. That's what a 9 looks like. It's got a round top. It's got a right angle there. And then a curved line there. So this is not in the form of a 9 at all. This should have been a straight line like that then. So this is not a 9, this is clearly an 8. And there are over 600 images in that video. All the timestamps have a date from 1986. So these images are clearly not from 10 years before they were supposed to be from, because the SOHO spacecraft was apparently launched on December 2nd, 1995. But then if these images come from the SOHO spacecraft, how come we have images with timestamps from 1986? So how is this possible? Is it possible that the spacecraft which these images originate from was not launched in 1995 but some 10 years before? And so here's another one of these images. This is one of the images that I had before, also clearly with a timestamp from 1986, and they all have this logo on them which says LASCO. And you can see the style of the writing is similar to what we see there. So now in this image, what we see is a number of distorted rings. And they are in all the images. You can see them here as well. Lots of dark center. There's a ring there. And it's obviously defocused, but you can see there's lots of material there in the sun's corona. And this one, you can clearly see lots and lots of objects, lots of rings with dark centers. And these rings with dark centers, as shown here, are actually what bright spots like this look like when we look at them through a defocused and a misaligned or uncollimated telescope. So whenever we see these distorted rings, we actually have objects like that, but the satellite is defocused and misaligned. So, and we see lots of these in this close-up image, lots. They're everywhere here. And where it's not as bright, we see lots of white smeared out spots and green and some pale green rings with dark centers. There's one there, lots and lots of them. And this means that there was a lot of debris in the sun's corona by 1986. And these may actually be the only images we have with correct timestamps. Now, there is no way that the people who were operating and analyzing these images did not know that these images showed a huge amount of debris in the sun's corona. In fact, the chronograph must have been specifically launched in a defocused and misaligned state in order to hide these objects from anyone in the public who might have an opportunity to look at them. So it must have been known before the spacecraft was launched that this huge amount of debris was in the sun's corona. And remember this image from 1986. Now, given the observational evidence from the surface of the Earth that the sun is no longer shining, and you may look at article 382 entitled "The Sun's No Longer Shining, Surface Observations," and article 434 entitled "The Sun is No Longer Shining, or is a Simulator Covering the Sun," for more details on that. So the sun from the surface of the Earth is no longer shining. There's no way it is shining anymore. But yet we have satellite images and spacecraft images with current timestamps still showing the sun emitting light. So what is likely is that the timestamps have been altered so the images are much older. So this would suggest that this particular image from 1986 has the correct timestamp on it. And it's perhaps the launch date for the spacecraft that is wrong. Or it could be that the chronograph was actually on an earlier spacecraft, and it was launched way before 1995. Now, these LASCO C1 images are composite images which provide photospheric magnetic field data in addition to data on the sun's corona. The sun's magnetic field data is inserted in place of the occulter. The magnetic field data comes from the Wilcox Solar Observatory in the USA, where data on the sun's magnetic field started being collected in May of 1975. It is thus likely that either shortly before this data started being collected, that it became known that there was something wrong with the sun, as the sun's magnetic field data would most likely show a declining magnetic field strength associated with sunspots. This was also obvious to the two researchers, Livingston and Penn, who used the data available to them to come to that conclusion. The sun's magnetic field associated with sunspots was declining fast and independently of the solar cycle. And apparently the data came from between 1995 and 2009. It is, however, very possible that they thought they were looking at current data for the time when they were researching this, when it was in fact much older, as the sun must have been much weaker by 2009 than the data must have shown, and may even have been completely dark by then. It is thus possible that they looked at data from the 1970s or 1980s when they thought they were looking at data between 1995 and 2009. And this is their plot. It clearly shows that the magnetic field associated with sunspots was declining. It was declining by about 50 Gauss per year. So, so it is possible that the spacecraft from which the LASCO C1 images was actually launched before 1995. And based on the fact that the first probe launched into space, and it was launched by by Russia actually, was launched in 1957, followed by the US, who launched the first space probe in January of 1958, or the first. So the SOHO spacecraft, from which LASCO C1 images supposedly originate, is supposed to be in the Lagrangian L1 position, and thus in a heliocentric orbit, which places it in line between the Earth and the Sun. And you can see where the L1 position, 135 radii from the Earth. So there it is. It always remains in that position. So as the Earth orbits the Sun, it orbits the Sun as well, so that it's always in line with the Earth and the Sun, always between the two. So now this was not the first spacecraft to be launched into that position. There was IC3, the International Sun-Earth Explorer 3, which was launched in 1978. This particular spacecraft was also then sent to a comet and passed through a comet's tail on September 11th, 1985. And that was the first probe sent to a comet, September 11th, 1985. 9/11. I wonder if they got the 9/11 from this. So the IC3 spacecraft was the first probe sent to a comet, but this was not its original mission. The spacecraft was diverted. So its original mission was actually to study the Sun. It was a Sun-Earth explorer, and it was meant to study the solar wind. So this spacecraft was actually diverted from its original mission and sent to a comet. It passed through this comet's tail, Giacobini-Zinner, at a distance of 7,860 kilometers from the nucleus. Then there was a flurry of activity, with Russia using Venus probes Vega 1 and Vega 2 to fly through comet tails in 1986. Japan launched 2 probes which flew through Comet Halley's tail. Giotto was the first probe to take images of a comet nucleus, and it was an ESA, or European Space Agency probe, and approached Comet Halley's nucleus to within 600 kilometers, finding a dark rocky surface from which issued dust. There was no ice. After that, there was a lull in activity until 1992, when Giotto approached another comet to within 200 kilometers of the nucleus, and then another lull of activity until Deep Space One, which approached Comet Borrelli in 2001. So there was a lot of activity after the 1985 encounter of IC3 with the first comet. They were very curious about comets at that time. Now, the fact that the first comet probe was not even designed or launched for that purpose, but was hurriedly sent on a mission in 1985, suggests that there was a sudden interest at that time in what comets really were. This was most likely because it had by now been discovered that there was something wrong with the Sun, and that comets had something to do with it. The different space agencies either took advantage of the public's interest in Comet Halley, which returned to the inner solar system in 1986, to justify the many exploratory missions to comets, or it's even possible that the public's interest was the product of an advertising campaign. Since there is evidence that data on the Sun's magnetic field started being collected in 1975, and the first probe was hurriedly sent to a comet in 1995, that between 1975 and 1985, the people in the know, or the powers that be, had found out that comets were bringing large quantities of debris into the solar system, and that this debris and the objects that remained in the Sun's corona were destroying the Sun. Would they wait until 1995 to launch a solar observing spacecraft like the SOHO spacecraft? No, I don't think so. I think they must have launched much earlier than 1995. I think they may very likely have launched it 10 years before, in 1985, and possibly even before that. which is why we have images from 1986. And here's photographs from Giotto of Comet Halley as it approaches it, and you can see it looks dark. There was a lot of dust. There was a huge cloud of dust around the comet nucleus. There was dust coming out of it, and it was emitting light, and that is to be expected because, as I have shown in many articles before, like article 431, Planet X comes as a comet. Planet X objects, which come from the Planet X system, which is made up of dead star systems, come into our solar system as comets, and they bring a whole lot of debris. In article 435, entitled Planet X Debris Filling the Solar System, Sun is now a dark star, I show that they bring in a huge clouds of debris with them. And obviously Comet Halley was not a stellar core because it was not spherical. It looks like it had an irregular shape, so it was most likely a piece of debris that came off a stellar core that then went into orbit, or possibly followed the same orbit as the original object. The original object may have remained with the Sun. It seems that the timestamp on the LASCO C1 images shown are a form of disclosure. The powers that be are telling us that these images are in fact from 1986, and that the spacecraft from which they originate must have been launched before 1986. They are also telling us that they have known for a very long time about what the comets, which I have named Planet X system objects or stellar cores, were doing to the Sun. It is in fact very likely that they found out by 1985 what was going on, and they must have started preparing then for what was going to happen eventually. The Sun was going to go dark. The 10-year difference timestamp on LASCO C1 images also suggests that the timestamps on other LASCO images, as well as all spacecraft images made available to the public and the scientific community outside of the reach of a gag order, have been altered. This means that we could be viewing images with 2018 timestamps that are really from the 1990s. In conclusion, LASCO C1 images with timestamps clearly from 1986 seem to be a type of disclosure showing that images from Sun-observing spacecraft have had their timestamps altered, thus indicating that images are much older than the timestamps on them would suggest. This agrees with the fact that the current solar-observing spacecraft images show the Sun still emitting light, whilst observations from Earth suggest that it is not emitting light. It is also apparent that the powers that be on Earth must have found out by 1985 that the Sun was dying and that comets were the cause. And these are the references. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.